When Jasmine Crockett, a renowned attorney, stepped into the luxurious car showroom wearing a simple cross around her neck, she expected a smile of welcome. Instead, she was met with the manager's cold disdain. But just one bold decision later, and the unexpected arrival of her brother, businessman Alex Crockett, turned the world of the man who looked down on her completely upside down. A battle erupted between prejudice and dignity, between arrogance and integrity. In the end, will justice and respect truly prevail? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Jasmine Crockett had just finished a grueling trial, her mind still buzzing with the intensity of the courtroom. Exhausted but victorious, she decided it was time to reward herself with something symbolic of her success, a car that represented her strength and hard work. Jasmine Crockett stepped into Capital Luxury Motors as if walking onto the floor of a courtroom, poised, focused, and fully aware of the unspoken judgments that came with every step. The temperature inside the pristine showroom seemed to shift subtly when she entered. Towering glass walls spilled sunlight over polished floors and million-dollar machines. To her left, a row of crimson Ferraris shimmered like heat on asphalt. To her right, matte black Bentleys glowed under chandelier light. But Jasmine's eyes locked onto the Porsche Macan, its low-slung, muscular frame poised like a panther. It wasn't just luxury, it was power wrapped in steel and leather, a reward, a statement, a mirror of everything she had become through years of grit, sweat, and late-night legal battles. Around her neck, a subtle cross hung, an emblem of her faith, strength, and resilience. It wasn't flashy, but it was a powerful reminder of everything she had overcome. The cross, like the car, was a symbol of her triumph. As she approached the Macan, her heels clicking with metronomic precision, Daniel, a young and clearly new salesman, hurried toward her with the earnestness of someone eager to prove himself. "Ma'am, welcome. That's our latest Macan. Top of the line," he said, almost breathless. 375 horsepower, 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds. Panoramic roof, and full custom interior. It just arrived from Stuttgart last week. Jasmine nodded, her eyes never leaving the vehicle. Her right hand grazed the hood, cool to the touch, sharp along the fender, powerful in its presence. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Daniel smiled wider, sensing her interest. "Would you like to step inside? I can show you." Then came the voice, cold, sharp, calculated. "That won't be necessary, Daniel." From the shadows near the executive office, Blake Thompson emerged, every bit the caricature of control. Slicked back hair, pocket square folded with surgical precision, and a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. His gaze found Jasmine instantly, and his approach was slow and deliberate, like a predator taking his time. "I'll handle this one." Daniel stepped back awkwardly, his smile evaporating. Blake stopped in front of Jasmine, standing just a few inches too close, making his dominance clear. His eyes drifted to her face, then paused, locked on the silver cross. There it was, the flicker of judgment, quick but unmistakable. The corners of his mouth twitched, and he let out a dry chuckle. "That's quite a bold choice," he said, his tone heavy with sarcasm. "Wearing a cross into a place like this? I suppose everyone needs their little charms." His eyes narrowed slightly. "But here, image matters. And yours? It's a little outdated." The comment landed like a slap, disguised as banter, but delivered with the precise aim of belittling. "You're Jasmine Crockett," he added flatly. "The attorney. I've seen you on TV, always making noise in those panels." He scanned her again, slower this time, gaze like a scalpel. "Didn't think someone like you would be interested in this car. Or this place." Then with a slight jerk of his chin, he added, "And that," his eyes cutting again to the cross, "doesn't really match the image we promote here." The insult was delivered with surgical precision, quiet enough to appear civil, but sharp enough to cut. Jasmine felt the sting, but she didn't blink. She had been underestimated before. She had been told she was too loud, too visible, too unapologetic. And every time she had answered with excellence. This time would be no different. She kept her posture straight, her voice calm and clear. "This cross isn't for you," she said evenly. "It's for me. It represents who I am, my strength, my beliefs, and the path I walked to get here. It does not disqualify me from being your customer." Blake tilted his head, amused. "You misunderstand," he said, voice syrupy. "Luxury has a certain aesthetic, a certain class. We cater to people with refined sensibilities." Jasmine's jaw tightened slightly, but her tone never lost control. "And yet you assume your definition of class is universal?" She folded her arms, eyes locked on his. "Let me make this simple. I'm not here for your approval. I'm here for that makan. I have the means. I have the intention, and I have the right to be treated like any other client in this building." But instead of acknowledging Jasmine's words, instead of stepping back and considering that he might have crossed a line, Blake doubled down, his arrogance calcifying into open contempt. He exhaled slowly, the kind of dismissive sigh reserved for people he didn't consider worth his time. His lips curled into a smile that was anything but kind. "Look," he said, voice low, deliberate, and soaked in condescension. "You seem like a smart woman, so let me explain this simply. This isn't just a showroom. This is a luxury experience. Everything in here, from the lighting to the espresso machine, is designed for a very specific clientele. People who know how to present themselves." He gestured vaguely toward her necklace, a sharp flick of his wrist like brushing lint off a silk suit. "And frankly, that little symbol of yours, it sends the wrong message." The words landed with surgical cruelty. Not loud, not dramatic, just calculated, cruel, and sharp enough to draw blood without leaving a mark. Jasmine stood still, her breath shallow but controlled, a quiet storm simmering just beneath the surface. She had spent her entire career dissecting power structures, dismantling prejudice in courtrooms, forcing institutions to confront their bias. But here she was, judged, reduced, and dismissed by a man whose greatest authority came from the overpriced suit he wore and the keys he handed over to people who looked the part. "Are you really suggesting," she said slowly, her voice steady but crackling with restrained fury, "that a necklace disqualifies me from participating in this experience you're selling?" Blake chuckled, as if her question was amusing. Quaint, even. "Not disqualifies," he said, shrugging. "Let's just say it complicates things. You see, luxury is about alignment, visual harmony. When a client walks in here, they expect to see people who reflect the world they want to buy into. You, that necklace, that courtroom energy, it clashes." His tone was rehearsed, like he'd given this speech before. Like this wasn't the first time he'd decided who did or didn't belong, based on something that had nothing to do with money, merit, or character. Jasmine blinked once, slowly. "You're policing my existence because you think faith is a fashion flaw," she said flatly, the sting in her words sharper now. "You're not curating a showroom, Blake. You're enforcing exclusion under the pretense of style." Around them, the gleaming floor reflected the makan's perfect symmetry, and the quiet murmur of nearby salespeople and customers seemed to fade into the background. Her voice dropped to a low, dangerous calm. "If a 1-inch silver cross threatens the illusion you've built here, then maybe the illusion was never that strong to begin with." Blake's face twitched, just slightly, a crack in the mask, but he recovered quickly, flashing the same smug, empty smile. "Let's not make this more dramatic than it needs to be," he said, taking a step back. "I'm just saying that we're selective. That's all. There's a certain image we like to uphold. You're free to take your business elsewhere if you feel uncomfortable with that." The smugness in his voice wasn't just infuriating, it was dangerous. It carried the weight of unchecked power, of a man who had never been held accountable, who had never had to answer to someone he thought beneath him. Jasmine's eyes didn't leave his. Her posture was unchanged, regal, composed, unyielding. "Oh, I will," she said, her voice smooth as glass but laced with iron. "But not before I make it absolutely clear that what you're doing is wrong. You're not defending luxury, you're gatekeeping dignity, and someday soon, you're going to find yourself explaining this moment to someone with far more power than you." Blake's patience had finally snapped. The confidence Jasmine carried, The calm defiance in her voice, it had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. His jaw tightened, the muscle twitching beneath his clenched teeth as his polished mask of professionalism began to crack. He had tried condescension, mockery, and exclusion, but none of it had worked. Jasmine hadn't flinched, hadn't backed down, and now backed into a corner by his own arrogance. Blake lashed out with the one thing he still thought he had: authority. His voice rose louder than it needed to be, loud enough for everyone in the showroom to hear. "All right, that's enough," he snapped, stepping forward. "I've been more than patient, but this conversation is over." His eyes, burning with resentment, locked onto the cross hanging around her neck. "This isn't just about a car anymore," he hissed. "This is about who fits in here, and you don't." The words weren't just cruel, they were calculated. His tone was filled with venom, his intent clear: to humiliate, to push her out, to reassert control by force if necessary. Then, with a dramatic wave of his hand toward the entrance, he barked, "You need to leave. Now." The entire showroom fell silent. The faint hum of the air conditioning, the soft jazz playing overhead, even the distant footsteps of other sales staff, all of it seemed to vanish under the weight of his voice. Customers looked up. Employees froze. Daniel, standing a few feet away, looked like he wanted to disappear. But Blake wasn't finished. He stepped closer, his finger pointing directly at Jasmine, and delivered the final blow with chilling clarity. "This place does not welcome people like you," he said, each word slow and deliberate, like bullets leaving a chamber. "If you don't leave, I'll have security escort you out." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire, thick, bitter, and impossible to ignore. Jasmine stood completely still, her posture straight, her face unreadable. She had just been publicly dismissed, not because of her behavior, not because of any policy, but because of prejudice, because of a silver cross, because Blake had decided she didn't belong. Her fingers instinctively brushed the pendant, not out of shame, but as a reminder. This symbol was not weakness. It was everything that had kept her steady through years of struggle. And it would keep her steady now. She scanned the room. Every eye was on her. Some looked away, others stared with curiosity, a few with quiet shame. But Jasmine didn't care. She wasn't here to please them. She was here to buy a car. And instead, she had been put on trial. And the verdict had already been delivered by a man who confused privilege for power. Blake's voice still echoed in the room, sharp and final. "This place does not welcome people like you." But even as his threat to call security hung in the air like a blade, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't need to be surprised because she had expected this. Blake's arrogance, his open disdain, the venom laced in his voice when he said she didn't belong. It didn't shock her. It angered her, yes. It insulted her deeply, but it didn't surprise her. She had seen this exact brand of polished prejudice before, dressed up in expensive suits and spoken in tones that pretended to be polite. So when he pointed to the door and told her to leave, she didn't flinch. She didn't give him what he wanted: a scene, a reaction, a loss of control. Instead, she did what she had always done when the system tried to shut her out. She kept her head high and walked through the fire like she owned it. The cold marble floor beneath her heels echoed through the stunned silence of the showroom. Each step a quiet act of resistance. Her posture remained perfect. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised. Not in arrogance, but in dignity. She didn't glance at the other customers who had paused mid-conversation to watch. She didn't look at Daniel, whose guilt was written all over his face. And she certainly didn't look back at Blake. He was no longer the obstacle. He was just the spark. As she neared the exit, sunlight spilled through the glass doors, casting a glow on her black blazer and catching the edges of her silver cross, which now gleamed like a blade. It was no longer just a symbol of faith, it was a warning. Outside, the world felt sharper, like the air had changed. Jasmine inhaled deeply, steadying herself, not because she was shaken, but because she was preparing. Her fingers slid into her purse, pulled out her phone with practiced calm, and opened her contact list. Not to call a friend, not to vent her frustration. She was already thinking 10 moves ahead. The people she knew, the influence she had, the spotlight she could shine on this. Blake had no idea the storm he had just invited. This wasn't about buying a car anymore. This was about principle, about making sure no one else walked into that showroom wearing something personal and left carrying someone else's shame. Just minutes after being kicked out of the dealership, Jasmine sat quietly in the front seat of her aging silver Honda. The engine was off, the air inside warm, and the weight of what had just happened pressed heavily against her chest. She stared out the windshield, her hands gripping the steering wheel as if it could steady her thoughts. But no amount of silence could drown out the voice in her head. Blake's voice, mocking her, dismissing her, as if she were unworthy of standing in his precious showroom. She blinked hard, then reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and scrolled until she found one name: Alex Crockett, her brother, her protector. The man who had built everything from nothing. With a sharp breath, she hit call. The line rang once, then twice. "Jazz?" His deep voice answered, warm but alert. He could tell something was wrong without needing to ask. "I need to tell you something," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. And then she did. In full detail, she told him about the Porsche Macan, the showroom, the salesman who started to help, and then Blake, the manager. The way he looked at her, the way he looked at her cross, how he told her she didn't belong, how he threatened to call security. Alex was silent for several seconds after she finished. Not because he didn't believe her, but because he was holding back his rage. "He said you don't belong?" he repeated slowly. "Because of your necklace?" Jasmine nodded even though he couldn't see her. "He said it didn't match the image of their dealership. And then he told me to leave. Just like that." The sound of Alex's chair sliding back cut through the phone. She could imagine him pacing now, shirt sleeves rolled up, jaw clenched. He had worked his whole life to earn respect, and now someone had tried to strip that respect from his sister. "That's not going to stand," Alex said, his voice sharp now. "He disrespected you, Jasmine. He disrespected this family, and I'm not letting that go." "Alex," Jasmine started, but he cut her off. "No, he thinks he can humiliate you and get away with it? Tomorrow morning, I'm going there myself." His voice was low and steady, the way it got when he was already building a plan. "And I'm not going in quietly." Jasmine let out a breath, a small, tired smile tugging at her lips. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious," Alex replied. "He kicked the wrong person out of that showroom, and tomorrow he's going to find out why that was the biggest mistake of his week." Jasmine didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. Her brother had just taken this fight personally, and when Alex Crockett took something personally, things changed. Breathtaking. The next morning arrived not with silence, but with thunder dressed in chrome and crimson. Just as the sun broke over Washington, D.C., the growl of a 6.75-liter V12 engine echoed down the polished boulevard leading to Capital Luxury Motors. It wasn't just any car that turned the heads of morning commuters. It was a blood-red Rolls-Royce Phantom, gliding like royalty toward its destination. The paint gleamed like lacquered fire, its chrome detailing sharp enough to slice the morning haze, and its bespoke grille bore down on the showroom like a silent declaration of war. This wasn't a visit. This was a statement. Alex Crockett sat behind the wheel like a general arriving at the gates of a fallen kingdom, composed, commanding, and cold with purpose. He wore a dark tailored suit, the cut sharp and intentional, the cuffs monogrammed with silver thread. No security detail, no entourage. He didn't need one. His presence alone turned the air electric. As he pulled up to the dealership entrance, the valet on duty froze, jaw slightly parted, unsure whether to bow or salute. Without a word, Alex stepped out, closing the Phantom's door with a smooth, controlled click. Every eye in the showroom shifted to him, like gravity had suddenly tilted in his direction. Inside, conversations halted mid-sentence. A barista at the espresso bar dropped a spoon into a ceramic cup. One of the sales reps blinked 3 times in a row, unsure if they were witnessing a billionaire or a storm in human form. But Alex didn't look around for reactions. He expected them. Every step he took across the showroom floor echoed like the ticking of a fuse. Shoes polished to a mirror finish, shoulders square. jaw set with the kind of stillness that came before decisive impact. He wasn't there to browse. He wasn't there to talk. He was there to confront injustice with the full weight of everything Blake Thompson thought he could deny Jasmine. Blake Thompson stood beside a deep blue Bentley Continental, engaged in animated conversation with a wealthy client in a designer overcoat. He was smiling, gesturing toward the hood ornament like he was selling a piece of heaven. But that smile faltered, barely at first, when he noticed a subtle shift in the room's energy. Conversations had stopped. Employees stood a little straighter. Eyes weren't on the cars anymore. They were all staring at the entrance. Blake followed their gaze, and then his stomach dropped. There, cutting through the center of the showroom like a blade through velvet, was Alex Crockett. The name didn't register immediately, but the man did. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, and walking with a slow, deliberate intensity that made the ground beneath him feel charged. Behind him, sunlight danced off the crimson phantom like a spotlight. And then it clicked. The name, the connection, the cross, Jasmine's brother. Blake's mouth went dry. His practiced confidence cracked like cheap porcelain. He tried to laugh, tried to mask the panic building in his chest, but it was too late. Alex had already spotted him. Their eyes locked across the floor, and in that moment, Blake knew. This was no ordinary customer. This was consequence in a tailored suit. Alex closed the distance between them, each step a silent verdict. When he stopped just feet away, his voice was low, but it rang with precision and power. "We need to talk," he said, "about what you did to my sister yesterday." Blake swallowed hard, every word he'd prepared dissolving before they reached his lips. The client beside him sensed the shift and stepped back instinctively, like a man backing away from a live wire. Alex didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The fire in his eyes said everything. "You made this personal. Now face it." The silence between them was a thin thread stretched to its limit, ready to snap. Blake's posture stiffened, his rehearsed confidence faltering under Alex's unwavering stare. The polished showroom that once felt like his kingdom now felt small, vulnerable, exposed. Alex didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was more dangerous than anger. It was the silence before the storm, the kind of silence that made people listen. "You judged my sister," Alex said, his voice cutting clean and deliberate. "Not because she was disrespectful, not because she broke your rules, but because you recognized her. You saw her face on the news, you knew her name, and you decided she didn't belong here. You saw a strong black woman wearing a cross around her neck and thought, 'That's not our kind of customer.'" He shook his head once, slow and deliberate. "You didn't see a client. You saw a threat." Blake opened his mouth, but Alex didn't let him speak. "Don't interrupt me," he said sharply, and Blake went silent again. "You humiliated her in front of strangers. You pointed at the door like she was trespassing on something you built. And all the while you had no idea who she is, what she's earned. Jasmine Crockett is one of the most respected attorneys in this city. She fights for people who don't have a voice. She doesn't just walk into courtrooms, she commands them. She spent her entire career defending the rights of others, and yesterday you tried to strip her of hers." The weight of his words settled hard in the space around them. Employees glanced at one another. A few customers shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to stay or go. But no one moved. Everyone was listening now. "And let's not pretend this was about your brand," Alex continued, his tone steady but ice cold. "You didn't deny her service because she didn't look the part. You denied her because of what that cross meant to you, because of what she believes. That necklace wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it wasn't offensive, but you used it as your excuse. You called her faith incompatible with luxury." His eyes darkened. "And that, Blake, is not just unprofessional, that is prejudice. Clear, ugly, and completely unacceptable." Blake's jaw moved, but no words came out. His face had gone pale. Sweat gathered just below his hairline, though the air conditioning hummed quietly above. Alex stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, but the intensity only deepened. "You didn't just insult my sister, you insulted every person who's ever walked into a place like this and been made to feel small because of how they dress, how they look, or what they believe. You disrespected her, and by extension, you disrespected this family. And let me tell you something, Blake. He leaned in just enough for the message to land with unmistakable force. We don't forget moments like that, and we don't walk away from them. He straightened, adjusting the cuff of his suit jacket. You think this place stands for excellence? Then act like it. Because what you showed yesterday wasn't class. It was cowardice hiding behind glass walls and leather seats. The room stayed silent. The tension didn't ease. It thickened, waiting for what would come next. But one thing was already clear to everyone watching. Alex Crockett wasn't here for revenge. He was here to make a man answer for what he thought would never have consequences. And now those consequences had shown up. In the flesh, in a red Rolls Royce, and with words that left no room for escape. The air in the showroom remained thick with silence, tension hanging like fog that refused to lift. Blake stood frozen, his posture rigid, his voice stolen, staring at a man who wasn't yelling, wasn't threatening, but was dismantling him piece by piece with nothing but truth and conviction. Alex let the moment linger, just long enough for the weight of everything he'd said to settle into every ear in the room. Then he took a step back, straightened the cuff of his blazer again, and turned his focus to the gleaming Porsche Macan on the display pedestal behind Blake. The very car Jasmine had come for, the car she had been denied. Without breaking his gaze, Alex said with clarity that sliced through the silence, I want you to process the sale for the Porsche Macan, right now. His tone was sharp, precise, offering no room for negotiation. And you will process it in Jasmine Crockett's name. Not mine, hers. He let the words sink in before adding, because you don't get to decide who's worthy of sitting behind the wheel of a luxury car. Not based on your biases, not based on your discomfort with someone's faith or reputation. That's not how this works. Not in this city, not on my watch. Blake's lips parted, but still no words came. His throat bobbed with the effort of trying to respond, but the authority in Alex's voice left him without footing. You had the chance to treat her like a customer, Alex continued, his voice now firmer, louder, and meant for everyone in the room. Instead, you treated her like an outsider. You didn't just make a mistake, you made a statement, one that needs correcting, publicly, permanently. The sales staff nearby didn't move. They didn't dare. Even the receptionist, who had been quietly typing just moments ago, had stopped mid-keystroke, her eyes wide, waiting. So here's what's going to happen, Alex said. You're going to finish what you refused to start. You're going to walk over to your terminal, pull up that Mackin's profile, and prepare the paperwork for immediate purchase. You're going to address it professionally, without attitude, without ego, and with the respect you failed to offer yesterday. He stepped even closer now, his voice quiet, almost intimate, but far more dangerous. And if you hesitate, if you try to spin this, delay this, or shift this onto someone else, I will buy the entire lot, tear your name off the front, and hand the keys to someone who understands what customer service actually means. The silence that followed wasn't just tense, it was seismic. Blake knew he had two options: resist and fall, or comply and fade. Either way, the lesson had been delivered, and every person in that showroom had heard it loud and clear. The silence that followed Alex's demand to process the make and purchase was deafening, but Blake's humiliation had only just begun. Alex took a slow step forward, his tone no longer cold. It was surgical, precise, and deadly calm. His voice dropped just low enough that only Blake, and those listening a little too hard, could hear it clearly. I told you, Blake, this isn't just about a car. This is about how you treated my sister, like she didn't deserve to exist in your space. And that kind of arrogance, that kind of ignorance, doesn't get washed away with paperwork. Blake's eyes twitched toward the showroom doors, as if looking for an escape. But Alex continued without flinching. There's a fundraiser gala this Saturday, he said. Veteran support, community outreach, the kind of people Jasmine actually fights for every single day. People you wouldn't dare speak to the way you spoke to her. She'll be there, front and center, along with senators, business leaders, veterans, and their families. You're going to be there too. He let the words settle in Blake's chest like bricks. But not as a guest. Blake tried to mask his confusion. What do you mean, he asked, though the answer was already obvious. You're going to show up as a volunteer, Alex said firmly. Not in a suit, not behind a name tag. On the floor, working, handing out water, clearing tables, whatever the team needs. You're going to stand shoulder to shoulder with the people you think don't belong, and you're going to learn something about humility, because the people in that room have earned every inch of dignity they carry. Blake swallowed hard. And if I say no? Alex smiled, but it wasn't kind. Then I'll turn this place into dust. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the certainty in his voice that made the threat feel more real than any raised fist. I will buy this building, brick by brick. I will put up a new name on the front, hire a team that actually knows what inclusion looks like, and make sure every person in this city knows exactly why Blake Thompson doesn't work here anymore. The room remained still. One of the sales associates behind the reception desk slowly lowered her coffee without taking a sip. A customer near the Porsche display shifted quietly, pretending to check his watch, but not fooling anyone. Blake stood frozen, the heat rising to his neck, his voice caught between pride and panic. Alex leaned in just slightly, voice quiet but razor sharp. You wanted to teach my sister a lesson about how this world works. Now you're the one in the classroom. And believe me, this won't be the kind of education you forget. He straightened his shoulders and stepped back, giving Blake one final look. You can either show up Saturday and prove that you still know how to serve, or stay home and watch your reputation bleed out faster than your client list. With that, he turned toward the exit, his words still hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. Blake had no doubt. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a sentence, and the clock had just started ticking. The tension Alex left behind didn't fade. It settled over the showroom like a storm cloud that refused to pass. Blake stood in the center of it, his spine stiff but his pride fractured, sweat gathering beneath his collar as the weight of every word pressed against his chest. The man who once strutted across this polished floor now looked like he might sink into it. He scanned the room quickly. Customers were still watching, employees were still listening, and the red phantom outside still gleamed like a warning flare he couldn't ignore. His jaw tightened, fists curling at his sides, but there was no way out. Alex had drawn the line with absolute clarity, and Blake knew he had already crossed it. Any refusal now wasn't just bad optics, it was career suicide. He cleared his throat, forced a shallow breath, and looked up, eyes hollow, voice clipped. Fine, he said, barely louder than a whisper. Then again, louder this time, trying to reclaim some shred of control. I'll do it. But the words tasted bitter coming out, like ash on his tongue. He wasn't agreeing out of remorse. He was cornered, stripped of the smug confidence that once shielded him. This wasn't an act of goodwill. It was survival. A few staff members exchanged glances. One of them, Daniel, exhaled quietly, the first sign of movement in what had felt like a frozen moment in time. Blake didn't look at them. He kept his gaze low, avoiding reflections of himself in the polished glass, avoiding the memory of Jasmine's quiet strength and Alex's unstoppable resolve. He'd been beaten, not with violence, but with something far worse for men like him: accountability, the kind you couldn't talk your way out of. And now, whether he liked it or not, he'd have to stand in a room full of people he once looked down on and serve. Alex's ultimatum hung over Capital Luxury Motors like a thundercloud, sparking whispers and speculation among staff and customers alike. Yet time refused to slow, forging ahead until the day of the highly anticipated Veterans Fundraiser Gala arrived. A month that felt like a year's worth of tension, build-up, and consequences. In that brief span, the name Blake Thompson had circulated in hushed tones across boardrooms and social media circles, always followed by the same question. Would he truly show up to the event Jasmine Crockett was hosting, and in what capacity? The promise had been made. The threat of losing everything if he didn't comply had been declared, and so the city watched, collectively holding its breath. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Convention Center was alive with energy on the night of the gala, an extravagant stage set for a cause that often went overlooked, supporting the country's veterans in their transition back to civilian life. Twinkling chandeliers lit the space from high above, each crystal facet reflecting and refracting the motion of hundreds of guests dressed in sharp tuxedos and elegant evening gowns. Large banners recognizing different branches of the military hung along the walls, fluttering gently whenever someone passed too close. At the center of the room stood a sprawling buffet arrangement, gleaming trays brimming with aromatic delicacies, while uniformed waiters carried silver platters of hors d'oeuvres through the crowd. Everywhere one looked, there were pockets of conversation. Corporate sponsors in hushed negotiations, veterans proudly sharing stories with fresh-faced volunteers, and politicians discreetly working the room for a favorable nod or handshake. A live jazz trio played soft, rhythmic melodies, weaving a harmonious underscore through the air that set nerves at ease, but never fully masked the underlying tension. The cause was noble, yet an undercurrent of anticipation rippled beneath the surface, as if a singular event was about to tilt the entire evening on its axis. And standing near the entrance with a composed grace that underscored her resolve was Jasmine Crockett, the mastermind behind it all, poised for the moment to come. Jasmine wore a sleek, floor-length black gown that showcased both elegance and authority, a subtle cross pendant glinting against the smooth fabric. For the past few weeks, she had fielded endless phone calls, managed sponsorship details, and ensured that every veteran's voice would be heard at this gala. Yet behind her polished smile lay the remnants of that fateful day at the luxury showroom. The sting of Blake Thompson's words, the dismissive way he had looked at her cross, the humiliation he'd tried to force upon her. She was no stranger to adversity. As a high-profile attorney, she had won cases where the odds were stacked sky-high against her. This event, though, felt personal in a way few legal battles did. Tonight wasn't just about raising funds. It was about showing that inclusion and respect could thrive in spaces once claimed by elitism. So, when whispers swept across the room, "He's here," he actually came. Her heart quickened, and she turned just in time to see a familiar face slip into the ballroom through the side entrance. Blake Thompson stood there in stark contrast to the lavish backdrop, clad in a plain white t-shirt, dark slacks, and a name tag pinned somewhat awkwardly to his chest. Gone was the expensive suit that once projected his inflated sense of authority. Gone was the superior air he'd worn like armor. Instead, he looked hesitant, uncertain. Clutching a stack of programs against his side, he stepped around clusters of guests, searching for the volunteer coordinator with eyes that betrayed a flicker of anxiety. A month ago, he might have strode into a space like this, chin high, confidence bursting at the seams. But now every movement felt measured, his posture cautious, as though he was bracing for an impact he couldn't predict. Yet there was no outward hostility. People gave him cordial nods, and a few recognized him from the dealership fiasco, but no one confronted him. The room that had awaited his presence had found him, and it was waiting to see what he would do next. By the buffet table stood Alex Crockett, sipping a glass of sparkling water with cool detachment, a quiet sentinel monitoring the arrivals. He wore a crisp midnight blue suit that suggested both confidence and exacting taste. Seeing Blake in such a subdued state was almost jarring. Here was the same man who had once dismissed Jasmine as if she had no right to occupy a high-end showroom, now wearing a volunteer badge that looked as though it weighed more than the world. Alex caught Jasmine's eye from across the room. A silent exchange passed between them. "He came. He's really doing this." And Jasmine's lips curved in the faintest smile. She might not forget Blake's past transgression easily, but she was prepared to allow him to prove his growth, if it was genuine. Alex, on the other hand, maintained a neutral expression, recalling the day he challenged Blake with the threat to turn that showroom to dust if the man refused to learn humility. Tonight, the lesson was in session. While the jazz band transitioned into a gentle rendition of a classic ballad, Blake found the volunteer coordinator, a petite woman named Eliana, who directed him to the far corner of the ballroom. There, near a small stage set up for veteran speakers, half a dozen volunteers busied themselves with tasks like organizing chairs, handing out name tags, and distributing informational brochures on mental health support. "You can help Thomas," Eliana said, gesturing to an older gentleman with a cane. meticulously setting up a small table for poster displays. Blake hesitated, but the memory of Alex's words fueled him. Refusal wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, he approached Thomas, quietly introducing himself. Thomas turned, blinking in mild surprise, then smiled. Soft, warm, accepting. Could always use another pair of hands, the veteran said simply. And just like that, Blake found himself crouching down to help adjust the table legs, his heart pounding with an unspoken admission. I'm here, I'm trying. Don't judge me the way I judge others. Across the ballroom, Jasmine kept half an eye on the exchange. She saw the moment Thomas reached out to pat Blake on the shoulder, saw the genuine gratitude in the veteran's face when Blake assisted with the table display. It felt like a slow unraveling of tension. The rigid stance Blake once used to broadcast superiority now bent in service to someone else's needs. She inhaled deeply, a mixture of relief and lingering skepticism swirling in her chest. Could a man so entrenched in elitism truly change in a month? A small voice reminded her that some transformations took a lifetime. Yet here he was, actively volunteering, shoulders slumped in humility instead of pride. She turned to Alex, who had edged closer, scanning the scene with that same calculated vigilance he used in high-stakes negotiations. He's learning, Jasmine murmured, half to herself. Alex gave a minute nod, eyes reflecting cautious approval. The evening rolled on, a symphony of conversations and heartfelt speeches from veterans who spoke of injuries both visible and hidden. Tales of resilience, brotherhood, and sacrifice resonated from the stage, echoing across the marble floors and high ceilings. Blake, stationed near the front with Thomas, found himself nodding to each story, eyes glazing with an emotion foreign to him. Empathy. A month ago, he might have yawned or glanced at his watch, mentally cataloging which high-end clients to court for the next big sale. But tonight, each word spoken by these men and women felt like a personal rebuke of the vanity he once worshipped. At one point, Thomas gently elbowed him, pointing to a line in the event brochure about specialized housing for disabled veterans. "Help me pass these around," Thomas said, handing him a stack of flyers. Blake took them without question, stepping into the rows of chairs with a purposeful stride. For a fleeting second, he recalled the day he'd called security on Jasmine. The memory bit like frost in his veins. Jasmine watched from the sidelines. Her own duties as host momentarily paused as she observed the subtle shifts in Blake's demeanor. He wasn't making grand gestures, wasn't trying to atone with public apologies. Instead, he was blending in with the volunteers, carrying chairs, offering refreshments, quietly listening to veterans who needed a patient ear. She thought about how just weeks prior, he'd sneered at her cross, dismissing her entirely based on a single piece of jewelry that symbolized her personal faith. Now that same man was humbly letting a retired Marine guide him through the intricacies of setting up a prosthetics display. The injustice still lingered in her memory. What he'd done had hurt, had burned her sense of belonging. Yet seeing him like this, she felt a hesitant sense of validation. People can learn, she reminded herself. They just need a reason strong enough to dismantle their walls. Nearby, Alex caught her eye again, and a flicker of mutual understanding passed between them. Then came the highlight of the night, a silent auction aimed at raising funds for rehabilitative services, culminating in a moment where each volunteer was asked to stand with a veteran on stage. Blake's name was called, and for a heartbeat, he looked like he might bolt. But the crowd's applause swept over him, leaving nowhere to hide. Slowly, he walked up the short flight of steps alongside Thomas, head held a fraction lower than usual, as though the weight of all the judgments he'd made was pressing on his shoulders. Jasmine and Alex stood in the front row, arms crossed, watching intently. The auctioneer began rattling off items, collectible memorabilia, vacation getaways, experiences with sports legends. Yet the real spectacle was the raw emotion in the room. When Thomas took the microphone and introduced himself, praising the volunteers who'd helped him, he paused to point at Blake. "And this young man right here helped me keep my balance all evening," he said, voice gentle but strong. "Didn't judge me for my cane or for my shaky hands, just made sure I felt safe." Blake's throat bobbed, his eyes dropping, and in that moment, the vulnerability was unmistakable. Applause followed, not raucous but heartfelt, and it wrapped around Blake like a blanket he didn't know how to accept. He stood there, blinking under the stage lights, suddenly aware that genuine respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. And for once, he hadn't tried to take it by force or by wealth. It had been given to him for doing something far simpler: caring. Jasmine, standing just a few feet away now, felt a complicated swirl of emotions. Relief that the man who tried to cast her out had finally learned humility. Sorrow for the countless times people like her had been turned away from spaces where they deserved to belong. Pride that the event she poured her heart into was not only helping veterans, but also teaching an unrepentant elitist that life couldn't be measured by brand names or price tags. Alex, still at her side, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, as if to say, "Yes, we did the right thing." She glanced at him, a small, thankful smile crossing her lips. "He's changing," that smile said. "He might never be perfect, but at least he's learning." When the program concluded, the crowd dispersed into clusters of conversation. Upbeat music resumed, and the tension eased into a soft afterglow of camaraderie. Blake stayed behind near the stage, helping Thomas descend the steps, ensuring the older man's cane found secure footing on each carpeted step. Jasmine and Alex moved closer, weaving around guests who paused to shake their hands or offer quick congratulations on a beautifully organized event. At last, they stood just a short distance from Blake. He noticed them, stiffened for a heartbeat, then nodded, an acknowledgement that the lines drawn between them had shifted in an irreversible way. Alex let a moment pass, scanning the man who had once threatened to upend his sister's dignity. Then he offered a curt nod back, not warm but not hostile either, a sign of begrudging respect. The hush of that shared acknowledgement felt more potent than any formal apology. Slowly, Thomas extended his hand to Jasmine, offering a thanks for the gala, while Blake stood nearby, shoulders lowered, uncertain if he should speak or remain silent. Jasmine broke the brief silence, her voice measured yet kind. "I see you've been busy tonight," she said, addressing Blake directly for the first time since the fiasco at the dealership. He swallowed, glancing from Jasmine to Alex, and then back again, as if expecting them to hurl accusations or demand restitution. But neither occurred. Instead, Alex spoke in a quiet, firm tone. "You kept your promise. That's a start." Blake's posture eased a fraction, though his eyes still flickered with the weight of unspoken regret. "I'm trying," he said, voice subdued. This is different from what I thought. I didn't realize." He trailed off, letting the unspoken words fill the space. He didn't realize that the people he'd dismissed so easily were capable of giving a level of empathy, camaraderie, and respect that his privileged world had never taught him. A soft, understanding smile crossed Jasmine's face, though it carried the echoes of everything she'd endured. "One night doesn't erase what happened," she said gently, "but it's a step toward understanding." Blake nodded, fingers twitching at his sides, as though he wanted to offer more, but couldn't find the words. Thomas, standing by, patted Blake's shoulder once again, a silent show of solidarity that struck deeper than any spoken reassurance. Alex, for his part, exhaled slowly, letting the tension that had been coiled in him for weeks loosen just a bit more. "You showed up," he added, "and you served. That's what matters tonight." Blake's gaze drifted to the name tag pinned to his shirt, just a flimsy piece of plastic, yet it symbolized the role he'd taken on. Helper, not gatekeeper. He closed his eyes for half a second, inhaling the reality that this moment was both a reckoning and an invitation to be better. The echoes of the gala lingered long after the final speech and the last toast, the quiet testimonies of veterans resonating in the hush of the midnight hour. When the lights dimmed and staff began stacking chairs, Blake remained behind, double-checking that every wheel on Thomas's wheelchair was locked properly, assisting with folding table linens, and making sure no pamphlets lay abandoned on the floors. It was a far cry from the man who once strutted through a high-end dealership, confident in his power to dismiss anyone he deemed unworthy. Now he seemed to have found humility in the simplest of tasks, picking up stray cups, guiding a war widow to the exit, or offering a parting handshake to a Marine with scarred arms and a steadfast gaze. And from across the room, Jasmine watched in silence, recalling the day he tried to strip her of her right to belong. This was the difference she realized between forced compliance and genuine growth. Maybe it wasn't a total metamorphosis. People rarely change everything overnight, but it was a pivot in the right direction. She glanced at Alex, whose gaze was locked on Blake. A single nod passed between them. Mission accomplished, or at least begun. Eventually, the ballroom emptied, leaving only staff and a handful of organizers busy taking down decorations. The last notes of the jazz band had faded into an echo, replaced by the gentle rustle of tablecloths and the low murmur of closing conversations. Jasmine stepped away from a final check-in with the event coordinator, heading toward the exit. She found Blake near the door, collecting used name badges and sorting them into a small box. He spotted her approaching, paused, and swallowed, a flicker of nerves crossing his face. She halted a short distance away, arms crossed lightly over her torso. "Thank you," she said, her tone devoid of sarcasm, resonating with genuine gratitude. "For being here, for helping. That means more than you realize." Blake lowered his gaze, nodding, a subdued, "You're welcome," escaping him. They left the rest unsaid, the apology he owed, the forgiveness she would consider, the path still ahead. Outside, the parking lot was awash in the artificial glow of security lights, the sky a muted canvas of city haze and distant stars. Alex waited by Jasmine's car, arms at his sides, posture relaxed yet still exuding the calm authority of a man who could buy entire blocks of real estate without breaking a sweat. Blake stepped through the glass doors into the cool night, pausing when he saw Alex. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Alex broke the silence with a short, measured, "You did the right thing tonight." There was no handshake, no grand show of camaraderie, just a statement of fact, delivered with the weight of finality. Blake nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. He started to walk away, then turned back, opening his mouth as if to speak. But Alex simply raised a hand, letting the moment stand without further complication. The unspoken truth remained. Some lessons carved themselves in deeper ways than words could capture. In the distance, a row of American flags flapped gently in the night air, reminding them all of the sacrifices honored that evening. Jasmine and Alex exchanged a final glance as Blake disappeared around the corner of the building, heading to his own car. "It took a lot for him to come here," Jasmine mused quietly. "But he had a choice," Alex countered, voice calm. "We just made sure he understood the cost of not learning." Jasmine tilted her head in agreement, recalling the raw determination in Alex's eyes when he first vowed to teach Blake a lesson. Tonight she had seen the fruits of that vow, an unexpectedly humble version of the man who had once caused her so much pain. Did it erase the past? No, but it was a beginning, a rare moment of hope in a world too often ruled by prejudice and profit. "He's not the only one who learned something," Jasmine murmured, exhaling slowly. "Maybe we all did." The siblings headed to their respective cars, minds alight with the night's events, the transformations they'd witnessed, and the echo of applauding veterans who deserved far more than just one fundraiser in their honor. The city lights shimmered across the asphalt, reflecting a world that could be both cruel and beautiful in the same breath. A gust of wind carried the distant hum of traffic and the faint, lingering notes of the jazz band that had packed up hours ago. In that swirling blend of sound and shadow, Jasmine thought of how quickly life could shift. 1 month, she repeated to herself. That was all it took to turn an arrogant dealership manager into a hesitant but earnest volunteer. Maybe that's enough time to spark real change. Glancing over, she saw Alex climb into his own car, the engine humming to life with quiet power. Their eyes met one last time. No words were needed. Both knew they had set something greater in motion. And as Jasmine turned the key in her ignition, she couldn't help the small, resolute smile that tugged at her lips, convinced that no matter how many showrooms or suits tried to limit who belonged, dignity and unity would always find a way. The story of Jasmine and Alex began in a moment loaded with prejudice, a single instant where someone else decided who did and did not belong. Jasmine, an accomplished attorney, fresh from a grueling trial, entered a luxurious setting, expecting to be treated like any other capable, paying customer. Yet because of a simple cross around her neck, she was dismissed and humiliated, as though her personal symbol of faith rendered her unfit for that upscale environment. Instead of allowing anger to consume her or engaging in fruitless shouting, Jasmine chose a path of measured resolve. She walked out, her pride stung but still intact, already formulating a plan to reveal the injustice hidden behind polished floors and high-priced cars. Her brother Alex, a self-made real estate mogul, who had built his fortune through grit and an unbreakable spirit, decided to stand beside her. He took action with the kind of calculated calm that signals more than mere indignation. It signaled unwavering conviction. In that moment, these siblings challenged an unspoken rule that wealth and elitism could determine one's worth. By quietly, yet firmly, standing their ground, they exposed the cracks in a world that believed it had the right to judge personal beliefs. Together, Jasmine and Alex orchestrated a confrontation that was less about revenge and more about forcing accountability. Alex arrived in a stunning, high-value automobile to the very dealership that had turned Jasmine away, commanding attention without uttering a single word. He didn't need to shout or threaten. His presence alone spoke volumes about the hypocrisy of gatekeeping wealth and prestige. In that face-off, the siblings showed that money itself was not the issue, but rather the mindset that presumed it could dictate who belonged in a space meant for high-end clientele. By leveraging both their financial means and moral clarity, they made the manager, Blake, confront what he had done to Jasmine. He had mocked her symbol of faith, reduced her to an inconvenient presence, and tried to erase her dignity in the very moment she sought to reward herself for her hard work. Yet instead of showing unbridled fury or seeking to destroy him, they chose to educate him through an invitation to serve, to meet the people he looked down on, and to see firsthand the worth of individuals beyond their outward appearance or personal beliefs. It was a showdown that blended personal stake with universal principles. The lesson here cuts deep. When discrimination arises, genuine action can overturn even the most stubborn perceptions. Jasmine had every right to be enraged, to file a lawsuit, or to publicly shame the dealership for its blatant bias. But she recognized that systematic change demands more than a solitary moment of outrage. It requires the humiliator to experience the very humanity they once dismissed. By insisting that Blake volunteer at a veterans fundraiser, an event close to Jasmine's heart, she effectively placed him in the path of real stories, real struggles, and real valor. Those veterans whom Blake might have otherwise overlooked became his teachers, showing him that true class emanates from character, not from brand labels or social circles. Through handing out food, assisting wheelchair-bound soldiers, and listening to their experiences, Blake confronted the undeniable truth. One's value isn't tied to gold-plated surfaces or brand associations, but to empathy, resilience, and mutual respect. It was this immersion, this forced proximity to lived realities, that chipped away at his preconceived ideas. Throughout this journey, Alex and Jasmine functioned like two halves of the same conscience, one armed with legal prowess and unshakable composure, the other wielding financial weight and moral fury. Their combined efforts underscored an essential message. It takes more than raw power to change minds. It takes purposeful, targeted compassion. By confronting Blake without hate, they demonstrated that even when you have the upper hand, using it to instruct rather than annihilate can lead to meaningful transformation. The sting Blake felt was not from a barrage of insults or lawsuits. It came from being required to see people he had scorned as fully human, deserving of dignity. Jasmine's unwavering stance during the dealership debacle and Alex's resolute handling of the aftermath together formed a united front that refused to let prejudice slide. In essence, they taught him, and anyone else who witnessed, that fairness isn't a favor reserved for a select few. It's a foundational right that no one should be denied. Their victory was not merely a personal triumph, it was a blueprint for responding to bigotry with strategy and grace. Ultimately, the crescendo of their story reveals a universal truth. No one can judge you simply because of your personal beliefs, and you should never relinquish your right to be treated fairly. Jasmine, who had been subjected to prejudice over her cross, refused to let that moment define her or discourage her from seeking what she deserved. Alex, who could have dismantled the dealership entirely, instead used his influence to illuminate an alternative path for Blake, one that led to reflection rather than obliteration. By ensuring he faced veterans who exuded quiet dignity, they shattered his biases in a more profound way than any legal battle or public scandal could have achieved. In so doing, they showed that sustained, purposeful action is the key to rewriting a narrative of discrimination into one of enlightenment. Yes, there was tension, there was anger, and there was undeniable power at play. But above all, there was a refusal to let hatred be the final word. The siblings used respect, compassion, and an unwavering belief in justice to reshape Blake's perspective, preserving their own dignity every step of the way. Their story lingers as a testament to the power of standing tall in the face of prejudice, proving that a single act of determined humanity can echo far beyond one heated confrontation. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. A police officer slapped a black woman in the middle of the street, thinking he was putting a stranger in her place. But what he didn't know, that woman was Jasmine Crockett, and she was anything but ordinary. What he thought was a warning slap became the mistake that cost him everything. Jasmine didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She simply stood tall, and the entire system began to shake. If justice can be struck down in public, what happens when it rises? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. 6:30 a.m., Fairfax, Virginia. The morning unfolded like a painting, air cool and thin, the sun casting a soft gold hue across perfectly trimmed lawns and ivy-wrapped gates. It was the kind of neighborhood that stayed silent on purpose, where the sound of joggers' sneakers were the only acceptable rhythm on the sidewalk. It was here, against this curated backdrop of wealth and whiteness, that Jasmine Crockett ran, unapologetically, powerfully. Her strides were steady, her breath paced, her mind focused. She wore no flashy gear, no designer logos, just a fitted black windbreaker, leggings, and a worn pair of Asics. From a distance, she was ordinary. To anyone else, she might be invisible. But to Officer Thomas Granger, she wasn't just a runner. She was an anomaly. Granger had seen her seconds after she turned the corner. He was parked under the shade of a maple tree, halfway through his third cup of black coffee and halfway through a crossword puzzle he never finished. His eyes flicked up. A black woman, alone. In this neighborhood? He stiffened instinctively, scanning the street with a veteran's intensity. He didn't recognize her. That was all it took. His thumb hovered over the switch. No sirens, just lights, just a signal, not for backup, but for dominance. In his mind, there were two types of people here, residents and intruders. And right now, she wasn't the first. Jasmine felt the shift before she saw it, the slight hum of an engine pulling closer, the red and blue lights reflecting faintly off the pavement in the corner of her eye. She stopped, one earbud out, calm, collected. She turned to face the cruiser with a stillness that spoke volumes. Officer Granger stepped out with the kind of gait honed over decades, slow, deliberate, and designed to make people shrink. "Morning," she said, voice steady. He didn't return the greeting. "ID," he demanded. No explanation. No probable cause. Just a man who expected compliance. Jasmine blinked once, unmoved. "I'm out for a run. Why do you need my ID?" The temperature dropped. A slow tension thickened the air. Granger narrowed his eyes, the lines around his mouth deepening. "We've had reports. You match the description of someone suspicious." Jasmine's reply came without pause. "Define suspicious?" She wasn't being coy. She wanted to hear him say it. His silence said enough. He stepped closer, his boots heavy against the pavement. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Jasmine raised her chin, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Am I being detained, officer?" That question, those 5 words, were like gasoline on a flame. A jogger across the street slowed. A curtain shifted in a nearby window. A woman on a porch stopped sipping her coffee. The world around them began to tilt. Granger's patience snapped like brittle glass. "Give me your goddamn ID," he barked, now red-faced. Jasmine didn't flinch. "Unless I'm suspected of a crime, I'm not required to—" And then came the slap. Not a push, not a grab. A full, open-handed, unprovoked slap across her face. The sound wasn't just loud. It was surgical, like a whip cracking through fabric. It cut the air in two. Time stopped. The street went silent. Even the birds went still. Jasmine's head snapped to the side from the impact. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hair shifted with the force of it. Her cheeks stung raw and red. But she didn't fall. She didn't stagger. She froze in place, stone still, spine straight, eyes wide, processing not just the pain, but the audacity of it. And then slowly, like a storm returning to sea, she turned her head back to face him. What Granger saw in her eyes in that moment was not fear, not even rage. What he saw was certainty, a calm, terrifying, unshakable certainty that this moment would not end here. "You just ended your career," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped low, almost intimate, like a verdict being whispered by a judge. "And you don't even know it yet." Granger froze, hand half raised like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. But now eyes were watching, many, dozens, phones lifted, cameras rolling, witnesses everywhere. Someone across the street muttered, "I got that. A jogger sudagot, Hunhard netop truffet henne. Did you see that?" The woman on the porch had tears in her eyes. Granger panicked. He lunged, grabbed Jasmine's wrist, twisted it behind her back and forced on the handcuffs, not to restore control, but to hide his own crumbling authority. "You're under arrest," he spat. "For what?" she asked again. His answer was a stammer. "Interference. Resisting." "You just assaulted me," she said flatly, "and you're trying to bury it with a lie." Her voice didn't shake. Her body didn't tremble. But the bruise blooming across her cheek told the story loud enough for everyone else. As Granger shoved her into the back of the cruiser, her words echoed one last time. "You have no idea who I am, but you will." The door shut with a solid metallic thunk, followed by the unmistakable click of the automatic lock, a sharp punctuation mark on the chaos that had just occurred outside. Inside the cruiser, it was a different world. The back seat was a narrow plastic bench, molded for control, not comfort. Jasmine sat stiff-backed, her arms locked behind her, the handcuffs biting into her wrists. She didn't shift. She didn't blink. Her cheeks still burned from the slap, but she didn't raise her head to the mirror. She simply looked out the window like she was staring through time itself. The stillness in her posture wasn't numbness. It was containment, like a dam holding back an ocean. Up front, Officer Thomas Granger adjusted his rearview mirror, glancing back at her just long enough to remind himself that he was still in control. She hadn't said a word since being shoved in. To him, that silence meant victory. He saw what he wanted to see: compliance. A subdued, arrogant woman who finally realized she'd crossed a line. But beneath that assumption, something gnawed at him. Her calm wasn't normal. There was no panic, no protest, no pleading. None of the fear he was used to seeing in people cuffed in the back of his car. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. The rhythmic tap, tap, tap was the only sound besides the low hum of the engine. He needed the noise, something to fill the silence Jasmine had left behind. For a man like Granger, silence was dangerous. It let doubt creep in. And he couldn't afford doubt, not after what had just happened in full view of a growing crowd and more than a few raised smartphones. He told himself he had handled it. She had resisted. She had attitude. He had reason. It was all by the book. Or at least, close enough. But her stillness continued to press on him, like the pressure drop before a storm. He checked the mirror again. She wasn't even looking at him. That should have made him feel powerful. Instead, it made him feel irrelevant. And that infuriated him. He cleared his throat, more forcefully than necessary. "You got nothing to say now, huh?" he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. No reply. He stared straight ahead, knuckles white on the wheel. Typical. Loud when you think you're right. Quiet when you're cuffed. Still nothing. Then finally, her voice, low and even, cut through the cruiser like a scalpel. You might want to run my name before you make another mistake. Granger blinked. He turned his head halfway toward the back seat, confused by the suddenness and the tone. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't desperation. It was something worse. Certainty. What did you just say? He asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't change her tone. I said, check my name. She leaned her head slightly, just enough to make eye contact through the mirror. Or better yet, check your assumptions. Granger felt a flicker in his stomach, a faint, cold twist that registered before his mind could rationalize it. Something in her expression told him this wasn't going to end the way he thought. Her eyes weren't scared. They weren't even angry. They were prepared. He forced a scoff. Oh, you one of those, huh? Think a fancy job title's going to get you out of this? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was the answer. He reached for the onboard laptop mounted to the dash. The screen flickered to life, waiting for input. He hesitated, hand hovering over the keyboard. Some part of him, the small, rusted voice of reason buried under years of bravado, whispered, what if she's not bluffing? But his pride was louder. He pulled his hand back. Save it, he snapped. You'll have your chance to talk at the station. Backseat silence again. But this time Granger couldn't shake the feeling that he was the one being watched, that she wasn't the one on trial. He was. Jasmine's gaze shifted out the window again, but her mind was miles ahead. She wasn't thinking about the cuffs. She was already playing the next 4 moves. She was already picturing the faces at the precinct when her identity came to light. She was already preparing for the fallout. She wasn't just a policy advisor. She was the senior legal strategist on executive accountability, reporting directly to the president. Her job was to keep people like Granger in check. And now he had slapped her. In public, on camera, with witnesses. And he didn't even know her name. That ignorance would cost him everything. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She wasn't here for revenge. But she would not allow this to slide. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about every woman who had ever been silenced. Every professional who had ever been mistaken for a threat simply for existing in the wrong place, in the wrong skin, at the wrong time. The cruiser turned onto Commonwealth Avenue. The police station was just ahead, and Jasmine Crockett sat straight, unmoving, as if walking calmly through a courtroom in her mind. A reckoning was coming, and Granger was still under the illusion that he was in control. But control, she knew, was never about who held the cuffs. It was about who knew how to break them. The cruiser rolled into the parking lot of the Fairfax Police Department, tires crunching over gravel as the sun climbed higher in the pale morning sky. From the outside, the building looked quiet, just another routine day unfolding. But inside that patrol car, silence pulsed like a bomb waiting to go off. Jasmine Crockett sat motionless, her wrists still cuffed tightly behind her back. The soreness in her shoulders was growing, and the red mark on her cheek from the slap throbbed with every heartbeat. But she held her composure like armor. Her breath was steady, her eyes focused. She wasn't thinking about revenge. She was cataloging everything. Granger slammed the cruiser door shut and yanked her out, gripping her by the arm harder than necessary. He strutted toward the building like a soldier returning with a prize. His chest puffed, his voice loud before the door even opened. Got ourselves a real one this morning, folks, he announced, dragging Jasmine past the front desk. Miss, I know the law better than the cops right here. Thought she didn't have to cooperate. His tone was cruel, performative, designed to humiliate. Several officers looked up from paperwork, pausing mid-conversation. One of them raised an eyebrow. Another smirked awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh or stay out of it. She fought me, Granger said, louder this time. Tried to challenge me out there. Started quoting laws like she was some kind of hotshot attorney. Wouldn't even show me ID. You believe that? He shook his head and clicked his tongue. But don't worry, I set her straight. He turned to Jasmine and added with a sneer, Didn't I? Then without waiting for a response, he kept going. You want to play games in my town, sweetheart? You're in the wrong place for that. This isn't D.C. We don't play soft here. He pushed her forward again, this time rougher. Jasmine stumbled slightly but caught herself, still silent, still steady. Her silence only made him angrier. He wanted a reaction, needed one. What, no more clever comments? He mocked. Where's that big attitude now? You had plenty to say before. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping into a low growl. Let me guess. You're one of those types. Think just 'cause you've got a few degrees and a fancy tone of voice, you're above the law. Jasmine didn't answer. She looked past him, straight ahead, chin raised as if refusing to grant him the dignity of her attention. That infuriated him. He stepped in front of her, forcing her to stop. Say it, he barked. Say you were wrong. Say you shouldn't have resisted. Say you deserve to be arrested. His eyes gleamed with something dark, something unhinged. Or are you too proud to admit when you lose? The room had gone almost completely silent now. The officers behind the desk weren't smirking anymore. They were watching, listening. Something in the air had changed. A tension had crept in, the kind that warned something was about to go terribly wrong. Jasmine turned her head slowly and met his eyes. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, precise, lethal. You have no idea what you've done. Granger rolled his eyes. Oh, come on, save the drama. You're nobody. Just another arrogant civilian who thought she could mouth off to a cop. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, her face unreadable. Is that what you think I am? He scoffed. Number, I know what you are. That was when she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she shifted her cuffed hands behind her back and pulled from the waistband of her jacket a small black leather wallet. She held it up in front of her, eyes never leaving his. He froze. The room froze. The wallet flipped open, and a golden federal badge caught the fluorescent light like a flash of lightning. Below it, in bold, unmistakable letters, United States Executive Office. National Security Clearance, Level 5. Jasmine L. Crockett, Senior Legal Advisor to the President, White House Counsel's Office. No one spoke, not even a breath. The silence was absolute. Jasmine stepped forward, cuffed hands still holding the badge out. Her voice was ice. I am a senior advisor to the President of the United States. I have direct jurisdiction over federal law enforcement ethics policy. And you, she looked straight at Granger, just committed assault, unlawful arrest, and public misconduct on a federal official, on camera, in front of witnesses. One of the officers at the desk dropped his pen. Another backed away instinctively. Sergeant Dawson, ranking officer on duty, stood up so fast his chair skidded back and slammed into the wall. Granger, Dawson said, eyes wide, voice low. Take the cuffs off, now. Granger stood frozen, his face pale. She didn't say who she was, he mumbled. She didn't have to, Dawson snapped. You just manhandled a White House official, you idiot. Still, Granger didn't move. So Dawson stormed over, grabbed the cuff key himself, and with 2 sharp clicks, unlocked the restraints. Jasmine rolled her wrists gently, not flinching. The red marks stood out against her skin like warnings carved in flesh. She didn't massage them, she let them show. Then came the sound that changed everything, the ring of the direct line. A special phone behind the desk, never used, barely noticed, but now it screamed for attention. Dawson answered, Fairfax PD, this is Sergeant Dawson. He listened for only a few seconds, his face drained of color. Yes, sir. Yes, she's here. Understood. I'll deliver it personally. He hung up. His voice shook as he turned back to the room. That was the Office of Presidential Coordination. We've been ordered to immediately release Ms. Crockett, begin an internal review, and place Officer Granger on indefinite suspension pending federal investigation. A long pause, then, Washington is watching. This incident is already under review at the highest level. Granger's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Jasmine didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. The power had already shifted. The room now belonged to her, and the man who thought he could use fear to command respect had just been publicly destroyed by a woman who never had to raise her voice to be heard. The silence in the precinct hadn't even settled before the first video hit Twitter. It was short, just 23 seconds. A phone camera catching the moment Officer Granger raised his hand and slapped Jasmine Crockett in broad daylight. There was no context needed. The sound of the impact, the way her head snapped to the side, the cuffs being slapped on, her words calm, chilling, unforgettable. "You just ended your career." It spread like wildfire. Within 15 minutes, the clip had already been retweeted 5,000 times. By the end of the first hour, it had exploded onto Instagram, Facebook, Reddit. Hashtags started appearing. Justice for Jasmine, hands off her, White House assault. By the time Granger handed in his badge, the world had already seen what he'd done. News anchors interrupted regular programming to cover the developing story. Breaking: senior White House advisor assaulted during unlawful arrest by local officer. The headlines were everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, even international outlets. Officer Thomas Granger seen striking federal official in viral video. Fairfax PD under federal scrutiny after assault on White House staffer. And most devastating of all, a slap that shook the system. The moment had become symbolic. It wasn't just about one woman anymore. It was about every unspoken injustice carried by millions. Jasmine Crockett had become a name etched into the public conscience overnight. Politicians from both sides of the aisle released statements within hours. Civil rights groups held emergency press conferences. Congresswomen and senators condemned the act as a blatant display of racial profiling, gender-based power abuse, and unlawful force. The president himself, without naming names, tweeted, "We stand by every member of our team, especially those who serve with honor, integrity, and courage. No one is above the law." And though the message was measured, everyone knew exactly who it was about. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just offended, she was claimed. At the Fairfax Police Department, the walls were closing in. Granger was officially suspended before the end of the day. His superiors issued a statement calling the incident deeply troubling, citing gross misconduct and violation of protocol. But it wasn't enough. The public wanted blood. Protesters gathered outside the precinct by sundown, chanting Jasmine's name, holding signs that read, "She could have been me," and "A badge is not a weapon." The video now had over 20 million views and climbing. Civil rights attorneys filed motions for investigation. Demands for systemic change flooded City Hall. Meanwhile, Granger's face was everywhere. Blown up on TV screens, frozen mid-slap, his eyes wide with rage, his hand raised, a still image now burned into national shame. His name trended on Twitter for 36 straight hours. Reddit threads dissected every inch of the footage. YouTubers made breakdown videos. TikTok teens added dramatic music and text overlays. He messed with the wrong woman. Even his LinkedIn profile was discovered and spammed with comments like, "Hope the badge was worth it," and "Your career aged like milk." There was no escaping it. Old friends stopped calling. Former colleagues avoided his texts. The group chats he'd once led with off-color jokes went dark. His family refused to speak to him. His father, a retired officer himself, sent a single text, "You dishonored the uniform." His wife stayed silent. His teenage daughter deleted her social media. A neighbor posted a photo of his house with the caption, "This is where Officer Thomas Granger lives. Let's make sure the whole world remembers." By nightfall, his world had crumbled. Inside his home, Granger paced like a man stranded in a burning room. The TV blared his name. Commentators speculated on prison time. Civil rights attorneys were calling it a landmark case. He watched the footage over and over again. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he couldn't comprehend how fast it had all fallen apart. In less than 12 hours, he had gone from respected officer to symbol of systemic rot. And what haunted him most wasn't the slap. It was the moment after. Her face, the way she looked at him. That calm, razor-sharp look of someone who knew exactly how this would end. The injustice Jasmine had faced was now center stage. Talk shows invited Black women lawyers, politicians, and professors to speak on the deeper implications. This isn't new, one analyst said. What's new is that it happened to someone the system can't ignore. Protesters quoted her words. Artists painted murals. College students wrote op-eds. Across every corner of the country, the name Jasmine Crockett became a rallying cry. Not just for justice, but for exposure, for accountability, for change. She was the face of a reckoning the system could no longer dodge. And yet, amid all of it, Jasmine herself remained silent. No social posts, no interviews, no dramatic statements. She didn't need to speak. The country was speaking for her. Her silence wasn't retreat. It was strategy. A pause before the next move. Because Jasmine wasn't just a symbol, she was a strategist. And she understood that when the system hurts you, you don't just survive, you restructure it. She was preparing her response, not just to Granger, but to the entire institution that had allowed this to happen. Meanwhile, Granger, alone in his house, blinds closed, phone buzzing with hate, had nothing left but the echo of his own choices. His voice, once loud and commanding, meant nothing now. He opened his laptop in desperation, typing out a statement, but there was nothing he could write that would change the truth. No words could outpace the footage. No apology could reverse the slap. He didn't lose his job that morning. He lost his mask, and the world had finally seen what was underneath. While Jasmine quietly built her case in the light, far from the cameras, darkness found a new home in a forgotten corner of Fairfax. And in that shadow, Thomas Granger began to unravel. The blinds were always closed now. Empty liquor bottles clinked on the floor like discarded shells. The apartment smelled of sweat, stale beer, and defeat. Granger hadn't shaved in days. He barely ate. He didn't sleep much either. His nights were consumed by endless reruns of the viral footage. He'd press play again and again, pausing on that one frame, his hand raised mid-strike, her face still, the crowd watching. The moment he lost everything. And in his mind, the villain was never him. It was her, Jasmine, her confidence, her calm, her silence. She ruined me, he whispered into his whiskey. Not the system, her. The rage didn't simmer. It boiled. Alone and disgraced, Granger had no job, no allies, no future. But he still had his bitterness. And bitterness, when left unchecked, becomes an invitation for darkness to knock. It came in the form of a letter, unmarked, unsigned. A single sentence typed on crisp white paper. You're not a failure. You're a soldier betrayed by a coward system. He found the second envelope days later, taped to his door. This time inside was a burner phone and an address. No name, just coordinates. And for a man with nothing left to lose, curiosity was the last drug he needed. Granger followed it. They met him in a warehouse. No logos, no banners, no flags. Just men in black coats, faces half lit, voices calm. Not angry, not loud, persuasive. They didn't talk about race. They didn't talk about politics. They talked about order, control, power. One of them leaned forward, voice like a sermon. You didn't attack the system attacked you for trying to protect it. And her? She's not justice. She's the rot beneath the surface, pretending to be clean. Granger didn't speak, but his silence said yes. They gave him a new purpose, not to reclaim his name, but to erase hers. Not with bullets, with whispers. Within days it began, a smear campaign designed with surgical precision. Fabricated financial documents appeared on obscure message boards, claiming Jasmine had accepted bribes during her time as a federal investigator. Screenshots of fake emails circulated on Reddit and Telegram channels, alleging she had buried evidence to protect corrupt officials. Twitter bots pushed hashtags like #CROCKETTCOVERUP and #CORRUPTJASMINE. TikTok influencers with no real knowledge began asking the same question. Why isn't anyone talking about her past? One post claimed she once worked with a disbarred lobbyist. Another accused her of hiding assets in the Cayman Islands. None of it could be verified, but that didn't matter. In the age of outrage, accusation was ammunition. The news cycle turned. Cable panels, once supportive, began asking questions. Is Jasmine Crockett hiding something? Was her rise too fast? Did she make enemies in Washington? Reporters chased her through Capitol corridors. Microphones were shoved in her face. Did you take the money? Are you being investigated? Do you plan to step down? She said nothing, because silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. But the pressure was real. Allies grew nervous. A senator quietly withdrew support from a bill she authored. A major network delayed airing an interview with her. The whispers were working, not because they were true, but because they were loud. Behind the curtain, Granger watched the chaos unfold like a man watching fireworks. He didn't care if the lies held up. He just needed them to stick long enough to stain her. Let her drown in doubt, he mumbled, scrolling through hate-filled comment sections. Let them see she's no hero, just another politician with a mask. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Jasmine Crockett was not standing still. She was tracking every move, every fake file, every burner account, every dollar spent. Because while the world focused on the storm, Jasmine was already following the lightning back to the hand that struck the match. In the basement level of a secure DC office building, with no nameplate and no public record, Jasmine sat at the head of a long steel table surrounded by people she trusted with more than her life. She trusted them with the truth. There was no press here, no cameras, just data analysts, cybersecurity specialists, and 2 retired federal prosecutors who owed her favors they'd never speak of. Jasmine had worked with every one of them before. These weren't politicians. These were problem solvers. They didn't ask her how she was feeling. They asked her, "Where do we start?" Jasmine tapped the digital whiteboard and began with the only trail that never lies: money. "Follow the transfers," she said, voice sharp, eyes locked on the cluster of bank statements already mapped on the board. "I don't care who's on TV. I want to know who's wiring money from where." Her years as a legal strategist had taught her that the law was a machine, slow, rigid, and clunky. But beneath it, there was always a current, and that current was always financial. The deeper they dug, the more patterns emerged. Payments routed through shell nonprofits. An independent news site founded just months ago receiving hundreds of thousands in anonymous donations. A PAC registered in Delaware sending monthly transfers to a boutique PR firm that had never filed a single invoice. The fake stories, the viral clips, the coordinated hashtags, all traceable back to a single digital fingerprint. And that's when the breakthrough came. Buried beneath layers of obfuscation and false leads, they found a name Jasmine hadn't heard in years, but had never forgotten: Dominion Shield, a shadow organization she had helped investigate half a decade earlier. They disguised themselves as a think tank for national security, but Jasmine's 12-month probe had uncovered internal corruption, violent rhetoric, and illegal surveillance of government officials. The investigation ended in multiple shutdowns and quiet arrests, but not total destruction. Now they were back, and this time they were targeting her. Worse still, the data revealed something that made Jasmine's blood run cold. One of the organization's current operatives, listed under an alias but confirmed through facial ID metadata, was none other than Thomas Granger. He hadn't just joined them recently. He had been with them all along. For 3 days, Jasmine didn't sleep. She barely spoke. She pored over every detail, cross-checking it herself before even considering it ready for federal escalation. When the team confirmed its final node, a direct connection between Dominion Shield and 5 well-known political donors funding disinformation pipelines, she knew it was time to move, and she did it her way. The press conference was announced only 20 minutes before it began. No networks were tipped off in advance. But the moment Jasmine stepped up to the podium in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, flanked not by security, but by her research team, the world stopped to listen. Her voice was calm, focused. Her eyes scanned the sea of press and flashbulbs and microphones, and then she spoke, slowly and deliberately. "I have not responded until now, because I wanted to speak with facts, not fear. What's happening here is not about my name. It's not about my reputation, and it's certainly not about my ego. It's about the very foundation of our legal system and the slow, intentional rot trying to tear it apart from the inside. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to expose the machine that tried to silence me." She tapped the tablet in her hand, and the screens behind her lit up with a timeline. False wire transfers, forged media accounts, coordinated publishing schedules. The press room gasped. The data didn't lie. The campaign against me was funded by a group operating under the name Dominion Shield, a group I investigated 5 years ago and helped dismantle. That group never disappeared. They just adapted. And now they're back, not just targeting me, but targeting the justice system we all rely on to keep order from becoming tyranny. Her voice hardened. I will not allow fear-mongering, conspiracy, or propaganda to define the truth. Not on my watch, not in my country. Within 24 hours, federal warrants were executed. The Justice Department moved fast, faster than anyone expected. Dominion Shield's headquarters was raided in the early hours of the morning under federal surveillance for weeks thanks to Jasmine's quiet tip-off. 5 high-ranking members were arrested before breakfast. 2 tried to flee but were intercepted on the tarmac of a private airstrip in West Virginia. Servers were seized, accounts frozen. Dominion Shield had fallen. The conspiracies were exposed. Granger's face was no longer on news channels. It was on federal watch lists. And as Jasmine stood stronger than ever in the public eye, the man who had once worn a badge now carried only hatred. And hatred doesn't go quietly. It was 2:37 a.m. The streets of Northwest Washington were silent, slick with the sheen of recent rain. Streetlights flickered across driveways and hedges in Jasmine Crockett's neighborhood, where quiet wealth and quiet power slept behind thick glass and locked doors. But this night, silence was not safety. Inside an old, unregistered Dodge parked 2 blocks from Jasmine's home, Thomas Granger sat with a pistol in his lap. His eyes were bloodshot, jaw clenched so tight it trembled. 3 others were with him, men drawn in from the ashes of Dominion Shield, ex-cops, ex-military, all with one thing in common. They blamed Jasmine Crockett for their downfall. Are we doing this or not? One of them hissed. Granger didn't speak. He just nodded once. They moved quickly, like they'd rehearsed it in the shadows. Black clothes, gloves, masks. One carried bolt cutters. Another had a duffel bag heavy with weapons. Granger had brought the plan. The rest brought the rage. The goal was simple, in and out. Kill the woman who humiliated him, who brought down everything they built. Leave no trace. But they hadn't planned for her to be ready. Jasmine had been reviewing court prep files when the security alert buzzed on her phone. System override detected perimeter breach. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She stood. In the weeks following the smear campaign, Jasmine had moved her home security into federal oversight. Her house was now part of an FBI-protected asset zone. What Granger didn't know, what he could never know, was that the FBI had been tracking him for 6 weeks straight. In this moment, this was the trap. As the group advanced through Jasmine's backyard, a low-infrared sensor tracked every footstep. The cameras were silent, invisible, but watching. FBI agents were already in position. One unit hidden in a van down the street, another embedded inside Jasmine's garage behind a false wall. Granger and his men slipped through the back entrance. The kitchen was dark, too dark. They moved slowly, weapons drawn, scanning corners, whispering commands. Granger's heart pounded louder than the rain tapping against the windows. They reached the hallway leading toward the master bedroom, and then the lights exploded on. Blinding white filled the house. From every direction, FBI, drop your weapons, hands on your head. It was chaos, screaming, shouting, footsteps crashing against hardwood. One man tried to run, was tackled into the marble island. Another froze, arms up, sobbing. The third reached for his weapon, too slow. And Granger? He didn't resist. He dropped to his knees. Jasmine appeared moments later, escorted by 2 agents. She wore a bulletproof vest under her robe, but her face was bare, calm, focused. She walked slowly through the living room, now filled with federal officers and floodlights. When she stood in front of Granger, he looked up, squinting under the weight of his humiliation. His mouth opened, maybe to curse her, maybe to plead. She didn't give him the chance. Her voice was ice. You had power, you had trust, and you used both to destroy everything around you, including yourself. He said nothing. Now look at you. You're not a cop. You're not a patriot. You're a failed assassin in zip ties on my kitchen floor. He looked away, face twitching. The agents began dragging him to his feet. You never understood power, she added. voice lower now, meant only for him. Real power doesn't scream, it endures. And with that, she turned away, never looking back. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights lit up the quiet street like a war zone. Neighbors peeked from windows, phones in hand, jaws dropped. By dawn, the footage was everywhere. Former officer Thomas Granger arrested in an attempted political assassination. Headlines blazed, "Failed cop turns terrorist in midnight raid on federal official." From badge to criminal, Granger's final fall. But none of them captured what Jasmine saw in his eyes. Not rage, not regret, emptiness. Inside the house, Jasmine stood alone in the room they'd tried to breach. She looked around slowly, papers still on the desk, the window still cracked slightly from earlier. Nothing broken, nothing touched. She sat, took a breath, and began typing her statement for the morning press release. "Last night, my life was threatened not by strangers, but by men once trusted to uphold the law. They came not for revenge, but to silence the truth. They failed, because justice is louder than fear, and I will not be moved." The lights had faded, the sirens had gone silent, but the consequences of that night echoed louder than ever. Jasmine Crockett had survived the attempt on her life, and now it was time for the justice system to speak for itself. The trial of Thomas Granger began 6 weeks after the attempted assassination. From the moment jury selection opened, the courthouse was a fortress. Armed guards at every entrance, cameras on every corner. This wasn't just a criminal case. It was a national moment. Protesters gathered outside holding signs that read, "Justice for Jasmine," and "No more rogue badges." Reporters camped out for hours to grab the first headline. The world wasn't just watching, it was waiting. What would the system do when one of its own turned predator? Granger entered the courtroom shackled, thinner, pale but still stone-faced. He refused a plea deal, claimed he was set up. His legal team, funded by anonymous donors, tried to paint him as a patriot gone rogue, a man broken by betrayal. But the evidence was overwhelming. The FBI's surveillance tapes, the digital maps of the intrusion, the forensic analysis of his online communications with extremist cells. Jasmine's home security footage, played frame by frame. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as the jury saw it all unfold, not in metaphor, but in hard, irrefutable reality. Jasmine Crockett took the stand on the third day. She did not cry. She did not yell. She spoke with measured calm, recounting every detail, the threats, the break-in, the confrontation. But most importantly, she spoke of the ideology behind the crime, how Granger's hatred wasn't personal, it was systemic, how he had become a symbol of what happens when unchecked authority festers in silence. The courtroom was frozen as she delivered her final words. "He did not just break into my home. He tried to break the foundation of everything I have fought for. But the law stood, and I am still standing." On the 7th day, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, armed intrusion, aggravated assault on a federal officer, and coordination of disinformation campaigns with the intent to incite violence. Granger stood still as the verdict was read, but the air shifted. The weight of accountability settled over him like stone. There was no applause, no gasps, just an overwhelming sense of justice fulfilled. The sentencing was swift. 15 years in federal prison, no parole, maximum security. But the courtroom was not the end. Granger's fall became a case study almost overnight. In Geneva, his actions were discussed at a UN Human Rights Council summit on racial profiling and institutional extremism. In Stockholm, his trial was cited in a keynote speech on law enforcement reform in democratic nations. At a conference in The Hague, Jasmine's testimony was quoted directly in a panel titled, "When Justice Fights Back." The footage of her confronting her would-be assassin played on screens next to legal experts, activists, and diplomats. What began as one slap in the street had now rippled across borders. Law schools across the country assigned the case as required reading. Departments of Justice and Interior reviewed use of force policies. Panels on cable news began replacing rage with reflection. Where was the system when Granger was radicalized? One anchor asked. How many more like him still wear the uniform? Meanwhile, Jasmine didn't take a victory lap. She returned to work, quietly, intentionally. But she was no longer just a federal advisor. She was now a global voice for reform. Her policy brief on digital disinformation policing was adopted into legislation by 2 states within months. She declined interview after interview, saying only, "The story was never about me. It was about who we let hold power and who we ignore when they misuse it." Back in court, Granger sat alone in a beige prison jumpsuit during his final sentencing hearing. He was offered the chance to speak. He stared at the floor. The judge, a veteran federal official, looked at him for a long time before delivering the final remark. "You were sworn to protect. Instead, you became the very threat the law was written to stop. You didn't just betray your badge, you betrayed your country." And with that, the gavel fell. The courtroom gavel had fallen. Granger was gone. The headlines faded. But Jasmine Crockett knew the war wasn't over, because what almost killed her wasn't one man with a gun. It was a system that taught him to aim it. For 2 weeks after the sentencing, Jasmine disappeared from the public eye. No interviews, no tweets, no press appearances. The world speculated. Was she exhausted, afraid, done? She was in the Roosevelt wing of the White House, behind closed doors, writing law. While others shouted in the media, Jasmine did what she had always done. She built quietly and surgically. She met with civil rights lawyers, police reform activists, federal judges, former public defenders, and even families of victims who never got the headlines she did. She listened. She scribbled. She drafted. She rewrote. What emerged wasn't just a bill, it was a reckoning. The Citizens Protection from Abuse of Power Act, 178 pages of hard, raw accountability. The bill proposed a federal public misconduct database to track officers across jurisdictions, mandatory independent civilian review boards in all departments receiving federal funding, a national ban on sealed settlements in brutality cases, whistleblower protections for officers reporting internal corruption, annual transparency reports for law enforcement agencies made public, harsh sentencing enhancements for officers convicted of misconduct involving racial profiling or retaliatory violence, and one line that would make the nation listen: no badge is above the Constitution. When Jasmine emerged from behind those closed doors, the political landscape shifted. On a brisk February morning, she stood on the steps of the Capitol, not in protest, but in presentation. Dressed in dark navy, without a single accessory, she approached the podium with the bill in hand and looked out at the sea of press microphones, flashing cameras, and congressional staffers. "I almost died in my own home because a man who once swore to uphold the law believed he could break it without consequence," she began. "But this is not just my story. It's the story of thousands of Americans who never got a courtroom, never got a hashtag, never got justice. Justice is not reserved for those who shout the loudest. It belongs to those who endure, those who rise, those who fight with facts, not fists. And I'm not stopping, not today, not ever." The crowd, including lawmakers, stood stunned. The bill hadn't been voted on yet, but the moral bar had just been set. The pushback came fast. Some media called it overreach. Some police unions threatened walkouts. Partisan commentators claimed it would handcuff the protectors. But every time they tried to discredit her, footage resurfaced of the slap, the false arrest, the attempted break-in, the trial, the conviction. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she went on a campaign, not for votes, but for truth. She visited precincts across the country. She sat with sheriffs and community organizers in the same room. She went live from small-town city halls, explaining the bill clause by clause. No filters, no slogans, just substance. "This bill doesn't attack police," she told one town hall in Missouri. "It protects good ones. It weeds out the ones who smear the badge with blood and silence." The people responded. Petitions gained millions of signatures. Local officials began endorsing the policy publicly. Civil rights groups aligned across party lines. Even unlikely allies, veterans, retired detectives, military families, began voicing their support. Why? Because Jasmine didn't just tell them what she suffered, she showed them how to never let it happen again. Inside the Capitol, momentum was growing. The bill cleared its first committee with bipartisan support. Several senators who had been silent during her crisis now co-sponsored her legislation. A few even admitted on record, "We failed to act before." Jasmine Crockett's bravery makes sure we don't fail again. And as the bill moved to the House floor, Jasmine prepared her final speech. She didn't rehearse it. She lived it. On the day of the vote, the chamber was at capacity. Reporters, visitors, aides, and even members of law enforcement sat in the gallery. Jasmine approached the podium slowly, holding a small black folder. Her voice was clear, steady, unshaken. 5 years ago, I was building cases against hidden corruption. 1 year ago, I was nearly killed by one of its foot soldiers. And today, I ask this chamber not to applaud me, but to listen, not to reward me, but to protect the next person who can't speak up. She opened the folder. Inside were the names of 46 individuals, people of color who had been killed, harassed, falsely imprisoned, or silenced by abuse of authority in the past 5 years. Some were teenagers, some were veterans, one was a school teacher, one was a pregnant woman handcuffed during a traffic stop. These names never made the headlines, but today they make the law. When the vote was called, the room held its breath. The screen lit up. Passed, the gallery erupted. But Jasmine didn't smile. She simply nodded once. Because this wasn't victory. It was responsibility. The law had passed. The storm had calmed. Granger's name faded into court records and prison registries. But Jasmine Crockett didn't fade. She rose, not as a celebrity, but as something far more enduring. A symbol. They didn't crown her. They didn't hand her banners or medals or viral hashtags. Instead, they watched. They watched how she walked into hearings without a camera crew, how she answered questions with policy, not pity, how she carried the weight of survival without using it as a brand. And in watching her, people began to see the system differently, or for the first time at all. Young public defenders in St. Louis began opening their morning staff meetings by reading from her congressional address. A community college in Georgia launched a scholarship for aspiring justice reformers in her name. And across social media, stories appeared. Quiet stories of people who once believed they were invisible until they saw her. A single father from Detroit wrote, "She didn't just make me believe again, she made me vote again." A survivor of police violence from New Mexico wrote, "When Jasmine stood up in that courtroom, she stood up for all of us who never made it that far." It wasn't that she had never been afraid. She had. It wasn't that she had never been alone. She had. But Jasmine Crockett taught a nation something it didn't know it had forgotten. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's knowing the risk and moving forward anyway. That justice isn't just about laws. It's about who they serve when no one's watching. That power doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it walks into the room quietly and never backs down. She returned to the communities that birthed her voice, not as a savior, but as a mirror. She met with high school girls in inner-city Baltimore who asked her, "Do they hear us now?" She knelt next to an elderly woman in Oakland who whispered, "You were right to stay calm, even when they wanted you to break." She never lectured. She listened. She didn't talk about fame. She talked about process, about the courtrooms, the clauses, the commas in legislation that determined who got to live in safety and who didn't. Jasmine didn't ask people to believe in the system. She asked them to make it better, to demand more of it, to understand it, to bend it, reshape it, question it, challenge it, and when needed, break it open and rebuild. Internationally, her name carried new meaning. In Paris, a documentary aired titled "The Woman Who Refused to Flinch." In Cape Town, protest organizers studying legal resistance cited her as a model of institutional navigation under pressure. In Sao Paulo, human rights students began translating her trial transcript, not for drama, but as a lesson plan. She was invited to speak at the UN Human Rights Council, not as a victim, not as a politician, but as a builder of law, someone who had been crushed by the machinery and chose, instead of rage, to pick up a wrench. In private, she carried the scars, The nightmares didn't stop overnight. The images, the headlines, the footage of that slap, the assault, the cameras, they replayed. But each time, she used them, not as fuel for anger, but as a compass, a reminder. Every time she felt the weight of it on her chest, she'd open her notebook, flip past speeches and drafts, and land on one single handwritten line. If not me, then who? Years later, long after the flashbulbs had dimmed, a child would ask her in a classroom visit, "Are you a hero?" Jasmine would smile, pause, and say, "No, I'm a lawyer, a fighter, a woman who got lucky and made the most of it. The real hero is anyone who stands back up after being told they don't matter." The halls of power still whispered. They always would. But now when power saw her walk through those doors, it stood a little straighter, spoke a little more carefully, and remembered. You don't have to shout to be unshakable. You just have to never sit down. As Jasmine Crockett stood victorious, not because she shouted louder than the rest, but because she stood firm, a deeper truth became clear, a truth that stretched far beyond the drama and the headlines. Her story wasn't just one of individual triumph or legal vindication. It was a story of dignity reclaimed, of justice rediscovered, and of a powerful message to those who misuse power. In the wake of all she endured, unjust accusations, physical humiliation, relentless smear campaigns, and even threats against her very life, Jasmine's most significant victory wasn't the legislation she passed or the criminals she brought to justice. Her real triumph lay in the profound human lessons her story had embedded into the collective conscience. Her ordeal was a stark reminder that abuse of power flourishes only when those who suffer in silence believe their voices have no worth. Jasmine's refusal to remain silent in the face of injustice did not just echo through courtrooms. It resonated in homes and hearts across the nation, inspiring people to believe once again in the potency of quiet, resolute courage. Her story challenged society's most entrenched assumptions, that authority always protects, that status quo always favors the just, and that fairness inevitably finds those who deserve it. Jasmine's courage unraveled these myths, showing instead that power, if left unchecked, quickly becomes poison. She revealed that true justice isn't handed down generously by those in authority, but must be demanded, continuously and courageously, by those who suffer injustice. Her very presence in the highest corridors of power became an uncomfortable but necessary mirror, forcing those who wielded influence to confront their complacency, their biases, and their dangerous silence. Jasmine Crockett's experience taught that the cost of unchecked authority isn't merely injustice, it's human dignity itself. Thomas Granger's single impulsive act, a slap meant to humiliate, intimidate, and silence, did not simply end his career, it destroyed his honor, reputation, and any moral authority he believed he possessed. Granger became a cautionary tale, the embodiment of the bitter truth that power without accountability becomes tyranny. The powerful imagery of that slap, replayed countless times online and in the news, serving as a perpetual reminder that abuse is never isolated. It ripples outward, corroding the integrity of entire institutions and ultimately eroding public trust in those sworn to protect it. Jasmine's journey illustrated vividly that injustice is not always violent or overt. It often hides quietly in subtler forms. Dismissive looks, ignored complaints, biased judgments, small daily indignities that collectively rob people of their humanity. But when injustice erupts visibly, as it did on that morning street in Fairfax, it forces society to see the ugliness it has long ignored. Jasmine's calm defiance, her refusal to respond with anger or fear, became a symbol of dignity and strength. It reminded America that integrity is not loud. It doesn't need to shout, scream, or strike back to assert its power. Integrity simply needs to stand firmly, unwaveringly, and truthfully in its own quiet strength. The emotional and psychological resilience Jasmine displayed showed that fighting injustice isn't about matching aggression with aggression. Rather, it involves facing hostility with intelligence, composure, and the unshakable resolve that justice, once claimed, cannot be surrendered. Jasmine's example ignited conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and living rooms across the country, teaching a critical lesson. Those who endure injustice don't need permission to speak. Their existence, their courage, and their silent, steady resolve demand acknowledgement. Her battle reshaped how the nation viewed those who suffer injustice, not as passive victims, but as quiet warriors whose steadfast courage can redefine an entire society. Her journey also exposed uncomfortable truths about racial injustice and gendered violence within the structures meant to protect. By standing tall after being publicly shamed and assaulted, Jasmine offered a powerful rebuttal to a narrative that has silenced women, especially women of color, for generations. She didn't just reclaim her dignity, she elevated the dignity of countless others who identified with her struggle. Young women across the nation watched Jasmine's battle and found strength in her quiet, undeniable courage. They saw clearly that their voices mattered, that they had value, and that justice was not a privilege to be begged for, but a fundamental right to be asserted and defended. Jasmine Crockett's story made clear that standing against injustice is often lonely and costly. Yet it also illuminated a beautiful paradox, that the loneliest, quietest battles often resonate loudest and furthest. Her ordeal transformed into a rallying cry, inspiring millions who had long felt invisible, unheard, or powerless. They recognized in Jasmine a profound truth, that silence only empowers the oppressor, while courage, even when quiet and steady, has the power to shake the foundations of injustice. Her resilience helped rewrite the narrative, showing clearly that real power lies not in violence or aggression, but in quiet defiance and moral clarity. Her story became a powerful example of the moral responsibility each person carries, not just to resist oppression, but to dismantle it. Jasmine Crockett proved that injustice thrives only when good people look away. Her courage forced America to look directly at its own failings, to confront the gaps between the ideals it proclaimed and the realities it allowed. By refusing to bend, by standing firm in the face of systemic cruelty and personal danger, Jasmine taught a vital lesson, that integrity and resilience, not brute force or intimidation, are the true engines of change. Ultimately, Jasmine's ordeal and triumph reminded everyone watching that humanity's greatest strength comes from vulnerability turned into courage. Her suffering revealed the stark and painful realities faced by many, yet her refusal to surrender illuminated humanity's profound capacity for resilience, compassion, and transformation. Jasmine's fight taught a generation of Americans that while systems may be flawed, the spirit of individuals who stand firm in their truths remains invincible. She became not just a symbol of justice, but a powerful reminder of the quiet strength inherent in those who refuse to be defined by victimhood or silence. As her story spread, its core message took root in the nation's collective consciousness, reshaping how America viewed its own responsibility toward justice. Jasmine Crockett, once a victim of abuse, became a lasting symbol of resistance against injustice, reminding the country of a simple yet profound truth, that every act of dignity in the face of abuse challenges the entire system that allowed it. Her legacy was clear and powerful, a stark reminder that the true price of a single slap, the humiliation and abuse of one person, is never paid only by the victim. It is paid by the very integrity and soul of the society that allows such abuse to occur. Jasmine's quiet courage and unwavering integrity taught America an unforgettable lesson. Women of color, indeed all marginalized voices, do not have to scream to be heard. Their stories, their dignity, and their strength speak volumes when they simply stand firm. Her battle was never about revenge or punishment. It was about reclaiming human dignity from those who believed they could erase it. Jasmine Crockett's story became the definitive reminder that every individual, no matter their background, possesses an innate right to justice, dignity, and respect. In the end, her journey reminded the nation of a critical truth, that true justice is never merely reactive. It must always be proactive, always alert, always listening. Jasmine taught America that the fight against injustice is never truly won. It is ongoing, constant, and demanding. It requires relentless vigilance, quiet courage, and the moral clarity to stand firmly, even in silence, against the forces that seek to oppress, silence, or abuse. As Jasmine Crockett stood quietly, her resolve radiating stronger than ever, America learned a powerful and unforgettable truth, that dignity is louder than shouting, courage stronger than fear, and justice more enduring than hatred. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.